Welcome to Sermon Brainwave with me, Rolf Jacobson.
And me, Karoline Lewis.
And me, Matt Skinner.
This is a podcast for August 31st, 2025. And the readings are Proverbs 25, 6 and 7, or the semi-continuous Old Testament is Jeremiah 2, 4 through 13. The Psalm is 112. A reading from Hebrews, our fourth Sunday in Hebrews 13, 1 through 8, and 15 and 16, and Luke 14, 1, and then 7 through 14, which is a passage I really love.
Why do you love it?
Well, I think I love it because it could help us reorient what it means to be part of a church community, where especially, this is what it says. When you give a luncheon or a dinner, when you invite people to join your congregation, when you imagine who you should welcome, do not invite your friends or your brothers or sisters or your relatives or rich neighbors in case they may invite you in turn. Yeah, don't invite the people you want them to invite you over, but invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. Especially in an era where people are fretting that congregations are, in our context, declining. Maybe it's because we, let me be more careful, tend to only invite people who are already like us. And we got to get outside and invite those whom God wants to invite, which is everybody, including those people, in quotes.
Well, and the verses that are skipped over, we have got verse 1, which sets the occasion and the location for the meal. But the verses that are skipped, verses 2 through 6, are healing the man with dropsy. And so when you look forward to, but when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, that sort of a euphemistic kind of phrase of Jesus, like the man I just healed is the one you're supposed to bring in as well. And he's the embodiment then of who are the persons you invite.
I have a question.
So you might want to pay attention to that.
What's dropsy? I've never met somebody with dropsy.
It's
as far as I know.
Dropsy is like edema, present tense edema or present context edema, like your body sort of swelling due to excess fluid is what dropsy is, which is caused by many things. But yeah,
it's good to have a podcast with 3 Bible scholars who can answer the hard-hitting questions like that.
Well, you know what? I do find it weird when we, in our translations, use archaic terms that nobody uses anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Speaking of Bible scholars, what you said about inviting the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, you don't need a Bible scholar to nuance that for you. Jesus is alarmingly straightforward here in his instruction, verses 12 through 14, which is fascinating. Often when he's the most clear, it's the stuff we don't want to hear the most. With the material in 7 through 11, I think you have to do a little bit of first century social practices and helping people understand how status worked, but then explain where you see similar dynamics in our own life, in our own world, where people kind of know this is where I fit, this is where I belong. I was in a store this morning carrying my bag, carrying a laptop bag, and then ended up buying just a couple of very cheap things. And I thought, it's amazing nobody ever searches my bag when I'm in a store like this. I was in Home Depot. And part of that's because of who I am and what I look like, and I get all that, right? But part of that's status, right? And so to not even be worried about that, but just to help people kind of get a sense of there are some locations socially that are safer for some people than others, or some that you think you deserve for whatever reason, and to help people play out how pernicious that can be. And then when Jesus is saying, not just come up higher, it's not just like, hey, I see you, or hey, take this gift, but it's really a reordering of status and value and how you're seen by the world around you, right? To be elevated by Jesus, or to be elevated in the kind of context he's describing, will change the way in which your society sees you, which again, not that that's the be all and end all measure, but it has to do with how a person's dignity is really wrapped up in some of these social practices as well.
I experienced this at least once in my life, but once in a way that was so powerful. I was invited after Maya Angelou had spoken at the National Lutheran Youth Gathering once. I was invited to the lunch with her. And I get in, and there's two tables, two round tables. And Maya Angelou was with the bishop of the church at the time and some church dignitaries at one table. And there were some seats open there. I sat at the other table because I know my place. At the time, had just graduated from seminary. After the lunch, they were about to present Dr. Angelou with, whatever the clock and, whatever the gift you got for it. But she got up and walked away from them and came and sat next to me and said, "No, I'm in a wheelchair. I'm not a church dignitary." And she came over and ignored what was going on and said, "Now tell me about you. I'd like to know who you are." And then gave me her card and invited me to write her. The feeling I had of being honored, right, was second to none. And if the church can embody those type of practices, we will be faithful to God.
Well, and especially, I mean, we've talked about this before in the Gospel of Luke, where this sort of reordering of society happens in meals, and what difference that makes when it's a meal that everyone is honored and present, because meals are also places where they tend not to be quick, right? It's not like a temporary sort of, you're invited for like this little thing. You're having to sit with people and sit there for a while and share things together. And so there are layers of what it means to have a meal with people, in that elevates even the challenge for us, right? That it's not just bringing people in. It's also how we embody a kind of hospitality that is truly about sharing and coming around a table and making sure everybody is fed. And so there's just, that for me, that banquet reality that is inviting us to think about places of honor heightens all of that as well.
One thinks about the junior high cafeteria, and you got to know your place. You don't sit at the cool kids table. Maybe you guys did, but I didn't. And how terrifying it is to be a new person entering that space. Somebody's family moved right before I was in seventh grade. It's the worst part of the day if you don't know where your people are, and the social shame you might experience if you sit above your station. I think it's a pretty good snapshot of what Jesus is talking about here. And the quote from Proverbs just shows this isn't a new wisdom, right? But what's new is that Jesus is trying to overturn the status quo of the sort of honor shame cafeteria.
Well, and he's at the home of a leader of the Pharisees. So somebody invited them. Again, it's not like he's removed himself from Judaism. He's engaged with Pharisees. He's debating Pharisees. Debates aren't necessarily hostile disagreements. And he borrows a proverb from the tradition.
Yeah. So you see the way in which then also how how Proverbs or ancient tradition or part of his tradition or wisdom then gets that they're not simply axioms that's a nice thought, but they really are then played out and embodied in Jesus' teachings and in Jesus' ministry, which I think it's also on a kind of on a side level, homiletical level, is really interesting to think about as a preacher, and then invite people to think about that, the way in which what are those kinds of sayings or kind of assumptions or beliefs or wisdoms with which we work, but what happens if they actually have to be lived out, or if we're called to live them out or embody them, and then all of a sudden they're not these just little sayings that you can sort of like put on a wall and say, "Oh, that's so nice," You actually have to do something with them. I think that also elevates what's at stake here for Jesus, and also what he's also debating in these interchanges between him and other religious authorities. All right, Jeremiah, more Jeremiah. As we said last week, we have 6.
I love this part of Jeremiah.
You love it?
I love this passage. So,
and why?
Over the course of Jeremiah, you're going to see that Jeremiah has a few reasons, that charges against the people. And here we have the first main charge that Jeremiah has of the people, and it has two parts, and the charge is apostasy. Verse 13 summarizes the whole thing well, although I do like verse 5, where God says, what did I do wrong that your ancestors forsook me and went after? What did I do wrong? God is saying. And if God asks you, what did I do wrong? You're supposed to kind of go, nothing, right? You didn't do anything wrong, God. But then this is great verse at the end. My people have committed two evils. This is the two halves of apostasy. First, they have forsaken me. All right. The fountain of living water. Who am I? I'm God. I am the fountain of living water. And they've gone after worthless things, dug out cisterns for themselves, cracked cisterns that can hold no water. So I think you need to know here that one of the ways that in ancient Israel, people would store things like grain or water is they would dig out a cistern, that is pit. They would line it with I don't remember what they line it with, but some sort of plaster-like material so that it will hold the grain. But this is cracked. So Jeremiah is likening God to a fountain of living water in an arid desert climate, fresh water, a fountain. And the false gods that we worship in God's place, to even if it weren't cracked, it's stale water that's been stored in the ground. And it's not even that, because it's cracked and won't even hold water. It's a great metaphor for what do we do? And I think we can ask ourselves this, or the preacher can ask people, is are we worshiping God, the fountain of living water? And what would that look like? Or to use Luther's question, whatever you fear, love, and trust the most, that's your God. Is it your job? It's your status, your relationships, your wealth? Is it your property? What are the godlets, the little false gods? Your sports team. I got that term from William Willimon, who gave a lecture at Luther Seminary in August. He called it God or the godlets we worship. And again, you could bring this in, right? You can go to Home Depot if you're as cool as Matt. You could buy a little pump, but that makes a little fountain, or stale water that's actually stained with the lime that they've used to line the pit. Kind of fun.
I really like that because I was really drawn to verse 13 too, in that metaphor. And so how can you as a preacher really bring that out?
What? There's water here. Isn't verse 13 about baptism?
No.
Sorry.
It's not. But yeah, how you can really play out that metaphor in terms of, as you just did, and just take seriously that contrast that Jeremiah is offering here, and particularly in our own lives. And yeah, I love that. Psalm 112?
Psalm 112. So Psalm 112 is actually a part of a twin psalm set with Psalm 111. They're each exactly the same length, and they're each alphabetic acrostics that go through. Psalm 111 talks about God, and then Psalm 112 talks about those who follow God. So in terms of the sort of the context, Jim Limburg calls Psalm 111 the ABCs, right? Because it's an acrostic of theology, and this is the ABCs of anthropology. What are the righteous like? And so it kind of goes through it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's a text to preach here this week, especially when you've got sort of more volatile, in the best sense, unstable, destabilizing text to preach elsewhere. But that's what this text is doing.
Mm-hmm.
We sometimes talk about texts that you shouldn't read unless you plan to preach on them. And we really say that about a psalm, but there is some stuff here that without comment could be confusing. The way it promises, wealth and riches to certain people for obedience and things like that. I've found Tim Sandoval's commentary really helpful, trying to reorder this toward happiness as opposed to prosperity. Whether people read it and preach on it is up to you, but it can be misheard if you just read it, if people aren't familiar with that kind of language promising riches.
I think especially it would be also true depending on what you do with Luke, and talking about that disparity between the places of greatness and such. It could get a little bit
Yeah, I do think verse 9 is worth pulling out in that context. If you're going to preach on what sort of a verse to leverage the earlier stuff, which kind of sounds like the prosperity gospel. If you keep the commandments, you're going to get rich and wealthy. That turning around that verse 9, they distribute freely, they have given to the poor. Their honor is their horn is exalted in honor. This is the image of a horn. You could think of a proud horned animal of some sort. And so the honor is found in charity. It's not found in power and wealth that one preserves for oneself. And by the way, when the wicked see it, they get angry and they gnash their teeth. I think we would probably say grind their teeth,
Yes. Yeah. And our final Hebrews.
Again, some bullet points. Here's a bunch of other things I should have worked in. So just, take this for the road. A mutual
final
affection
exhortation.
Continue. But the most important verse is verse 2, a very famous verse that people might not know where it's from.
Yeah.
Do not neglect to show hospitality for strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels. I like the old translation, unaware, without knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's an allusion to
Genesis
Abraham and Sarah, or Abraham and Sarah by that point, entertaining the three visitors who are either the Trinity or three angels, depending on who you ask. But yeah.
You might want to talk about verse 8 a little bit as well. It's a lot of final advice. There's not a lot of theology here, but there's a theological statement, verse 8, that I have sometimes heard reference to as if theology can't change or the church doesn't change or that, God has somehow set the future according to an inalterable plan or something like that. The context suggests to me that verse 8 is about Jesus's reliability toward us as the thing that's not changing. I don't know if that's a chance for a little theological corrective here and there.
That is the question is, does God change? And our friend Alan Padgett, speaking as only a systematic theologian who is Methodist, would say, says, God does not change in God's perfections, God's mercy, God's grace, God's power. But what God does change in how God responds to us and deals with us. I think that's sort of a helpful. God is not the unmoved mover. God is committed creation, and sometimes God changes what God's intentions are going to do. All sorts of stories in the Old Testament. Now God's ready to zap the city of Nineveh and goes, guess I won't, because the cows put on repentant clothing. So
the word is also, it's translated same, but it's the ha autos, so it's like it's self, and so I think there's an implication here of obviously consistency, that Christ is who Jesus is today, yesterday, today, and forever. And so there's that promise in there as well of the consistency or the selfness of Jesus that we can count on, and especially in these final exhortations, right, of the author, of what do you leave your audience with, and to leave them with this promise is not a bad ending.
Sermon Brainwave is a production of Luther Seminary's Working Preacher. Working Preacher has been a trusted source of inspiration, interpretation, and imagination for preachers worldwide since 2007. Find episodes and links at workingpreacher.org/brainwave, and be sure to like, rate, subscribe, and comment on YouTube. Thanks for joining us.